Hello everyone, my name is Michael Knipp, and today we are going to be talking about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Rebecca is a classic book written in 1938, which, fun fact, was written one presidential term 4 years before our current president, President Joe Biden. This book was brought to my attention because it is one of Murphy Napier's favorite books, and she recommends it strongly as one of her favorite books, one of her favorite classics, and also as a classic domestic thriller. Now, as someone that normally has a hard time reading classics, that is sort of what drew me. I wanted to read something with good prose, and I wanted to read a classic, but I usually have mixed results with classics, so the domestic thriller part was what interested me. Honestly, I was like, is this one of the first domestic thrillers? Someone correct me. I feel like this might have to be one of the first domestic thrillers. The thing was, back then, it doesn't seem like that was a genre, and this book was sold as a romance book, which, hey, if you're selling Rebecca as a romance book, it's a whole different sort of journey than if you kind of know it's a thriller going in. Regardless, this is a classic story that's been around for a very long time. It's been very popular. It's been adapted at least twice that I know of. The first being an Alfred Hitchcock movie, the second being a recent Netflix adaptation. I haven't seen either one of them. But anyway, because this is a domestic thriller, I can't explain too much about the plot. The way that Murphy always talks about this book is she talks about it having wonderful prose and it being about a girl that gets married to someone whose wife has recently passed, and then everything is kind of weird and mysterious and kind of creepy. Those things hold true, and it is a sort of normal domestic thriller setup where everything is not as it seems, and the main character is a stand-in for the reader because they are both in the dark trying to figure out what's going on. Let's talk about some of the prose first, and the first pro is going to be prose. I don't know if you've noticed this, but two of the biggest booktubers that exist on YouTube have a really hard time with the word prose and getting its singular and plural form mixed up. First, we're going to be talking about the first pro, that is the prose, aka the writing style. The writing style of this book is very pretty. I still haven't fully developed a sense of what I consider to be purple prose, but this prose is specifically designed to be beautiful. And the protagonist of this story is a young 20-something who is very naive. She's not used to the world, but she is a dreamer. So we spend a lot of the time exploring the themes and the places and the characters in the book through this daydreamer of a character. And the way that she sort of thinks things through ends up with a lot of beautiful metaphors and comparisons, etc. Fancy language, as it were. So depending on how well you are into that sort of writing, I think this book may be an easier or harder read, because there are significant chunks of the story, not necessarily all like chunked together, but over time, there is a lot of time spent daydreaming in the protagonist of this book's head. It's very often that she will see something which will then spark some sort of imaginary version of where she thinks things may be going in her head. So a lot of times you'll see something, take a couple paragraphs of a fantasy of sorts, and then go back to the normal, what she's actually experiencing. And sometimes that worked for me, sometimes it didn't. I would say that one of the first cons that I have with this book is it does seem a little bit lengthy for the story that it's trying to tell. Maybe it sits in some of these areas a little bit too long. I know that people disagree, and I know that this is the channel where I've talked about loving 1,000-page epic fantasy books because I just want to sit in the moment and know all the things. If this works for you, and the language specifically of this classic works for you, it was written in the 1930s, as I said, then that may be something that you love. For me, it was something that I enjoyed some of the time, but also still thought the book was a little bit long. Another pro is that the story itself is interesting. It took some time for everything to sort of sink in. I think the beginning of the book is intentionally very confusing. It's one of those things that when you read it through a second time, or if you finish the book and then go back to the beginning, it will start sort of all clicking into place better. But once everything started getting established, I was interested in the story and the characters. It was fun to try to piece together the clues that we were seeing and then see the way that the different characters would interact with what they now knew as they knew new things. A slight con that may sort of be piggybacking on the last one, sometimes that information is doled out a little bit less often than you might want. Especially for the first half of the book, often you'll get like one teeny tidbit of information and then a long spell where you will just be dealing with 1930s culture and propriety and like all of the things that happen, just like social interactions. Because it's a classic, there's a lot of these, like, everyone takes a very long time to talk around the thing they actually want to say instead of actually saying anything forthright. But once everything starts coming together, it does come together fast. I feel like from the 50% mark to the end, it is a lot more enjoyable. And my level of connection and interest with the characters in the story drastically changed at that point as well. Now, because this is a classic, and classics have been around for a very long time, and books that have been deemed classic have been sometimes almost beaten to death with different interpretive theories and like hermeneutics, basically. I feel like if you go looking for explanations and interpretations of this plot, and my guess is if you go watch the adaptations of this movie, the two different adaptations, you're going to come away with very different themes, especially depending on how much you want to eisegete into what you're watching / reading, and how much you're just exegeting from the actual text, especially with a modern interpretation. I've seen lots of different extrapolations of what the story was trying to do and the goals that it was trying to meet based on a lot of like reading into the text based on lots of external factors. So there is that sort of dialogue around the story if that's what you want, but if you want to just sort of pull what's in the text there and extract it as a normal, typical, interesting story / thriller placed in a period outside of our own, it's still very interesting and enjoyable. A word of advice is if you are going to try to read this book, read the first 2 chapters and try to understand them, but get that they won't fully necessarily make sense. At times, I thought I was struggling with the prose or the way that the story was being told, but in all actuality, I think the first 2 chapters are meant to be a little bit confusing. Chapter 3 moving forward will make sense. I don't know if that was something that was there back in the day, like confusing for people when they initially read it or what, but that's the way that it was for me. Anyway, the bottom line verdict on this book for me was that it was a very fun read. Once it got going, I was very invested. Unlike with a lot of things with adaptations, I'm normally like an adaptation snob. I am curious to see the different takes that people might have on this book. And while this book definitely didn't hit me the way that it hit someone like a Murphy, where it's like my favorite book of all time, it was definitely enjoyable on different levels than other classics that I've read. It was more digestible. Once the story actually got going, I thought it was pretty well paced. And I am definitely glad that I read this book. I took a little bit of a step outside of my wheelhouse by reading something older, but it was in a genre that I have some interest in, which is the thriller genre. And I was rewarded with an experience that I enjoyed, and I was able to enjoy. This was the Patreon buddy read on my Discord this month. And I'm pretty sure that everyone who read it enjoyed it. So thanks to my patrons who voted to read Rebecca this month. Once again, you guys have knocked it out of the park with a great one. I'm curious how many people watching this video have read Rebecca. Was it interesting for you? Have you seen either of the adaptations, and what did you think? In some of my research surrounding this book, I heard about some of the changes that were made in the Alfred Hitchcock version. I thought that those were very interesting changes, though I understood why they might be made. If you're watching this, are you one of those people that's heard Murphy talk about it endless numbers of time and it piqued your curiosity? Anyway, thank you for watching this review. If you liked it, you can give it a thumbs up. Like I said, if you want to comment down your thoughts on either this video or this book or any of the adaptations down below, please do. If you'd like to have longer form discussions about this or anything else, there's a link down below to a Discord. We'd love to have you there. I have a lot of fun there. Recently, I was just overwhelmed with emotion for just how much this Discord and like my friends there are now part of my life, and it made me very happy. I'm very thankful and blessed to have that over there. If you'd like to join that, like I said, there's a link down below. If you'd like to support this channel and what I do here, there's a link to a Patreon down below as well. Thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you again soon, and I hope you're having a great week. Bye. Always looking out tired, sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired, sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.